5.
I really feel, Liam, that this should not be a tribal matter. No one expressing an opinion in a free society should get a knock on the door from the police.
4.
This is the country of Magna Carta. I don't understand how this can happen in Britain. And it's absolutely clear the world is watching.
3.
Capitalism did not fail, it was ruined. And I make the point that it was ruined by the heavy hand of the government.
2.
Look on it like you're reading your obituaries and you haven't even had to die.
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Allison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. It's been a hell of a week, Allison, not least for you and for the Telegraph. The Remembrance Sunday visit to your home by Essex Police in connection with a year-old tweet which allegedly stirred up racial hatred has sparked a fierce debate going way beyond the UK about free speech and a waste of police resources. It's fair to say there's been nothing short of a wave of outrage as legal experts, MPs from various parties, former prime ministers, and in a surreal twist, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, newly installed in Donald Trump's new team at the White House, have come out in support for you. Essex Police say they've done nothing wrong. They've complained to media standards watchdog, IPSA, over alleged false reporting about its ongoing investigation. But I think it's fair to say that plenty of onlookers are concluding that the boys and girls in blue messed with the wrong journalist when they knocked on your door, uninvited, in uniform, in full view of your neighbours, on Remembrance Sunday morning, and engaged in an exchange that has turned your life upside down. Though she may be but little, she is fierce, as Helena says of Hermia in A Midsummer Night's Dream. It's a line you yourself used in your Wednesday Telegraph column, link in the show notes to this episode, the headline of which is, "My Week from Hell shows why the Britain we love and trust has gone." It's a sentiment shared by countless Telegraph readers and thousands of Planet Normal listeners who have absolutely inundated the Planet Normal inbox, wishing you strength and resolve. We'll be reading out a selection later in this episode. And I have to admit, dear co-pilot, tough guy that I am, when you wrote in your column of the London cabbie who said to you, "Are you Allison Pearson?" You replied yes, and he said, "No charge for you, love." I was actually moved to tears on your behalf. There's lots more going on, not least the growing row over Labour's move to slap an effective rate of 20% inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million, and Britain's generally mild-mannered, ruddy-cheeked farmers have now got their blood up. We'll be discussing that as well as the worrying return of inflation. But let's start with your new chum, Elon Musk, the man who owns what used to be called Twitter, tweeting in support of you. You sent me a screenshot of that tweet and wrote, "He's my new bestie. You're bumped." Is there no loyalty in this world?
Look, let's get real here.
Emmanuel Macron, Elon Musk. What is it about guys with names that begin with E?
Your rocket is made of a toilet roll with sticky back plastic, but Elon
Here's one I made earlier.
has got a real rocket.
So it's all about rockets, is it? Crikey.
Well, I think if the rocket of right thinking, the planet of sweet reason, were to be given physical form, it would be Elon's rocket dropping into that sort of like those things you use in the kitchen to get the pasta out of the boiling water. So, I mean, I was actually delighted, of course, because when you're messing with the lunatics at Essex Police, it's quite nice to be touched. What did Ronald Reagan say? They slip the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. That's pretty much how I felt, really. It's, as you say, Liam, been astonishing outpouring of support, really. In fact, I thought I was doing quite well today, not getting upset. And then, of course, I started reading the astounding number of messages in the Planet Normal inbox and in my own inbox, and just got very, very emotional because people are very kind. Actually, this will make you laugh because I know you've been crying on my behalf, but a friend said, look on it as like you're reading your obituaries and you haven't even had to die. So that's a positive. And I think that I was very encouraged. We're recording this on Wednesday, and at PMQs in the House of Commons, we had that fantastic Labour MP, Graham Stringer, who stood up and asked a question of Angela Rayner, who was standing in for Keir Starmer, and he was very concerned about the Stasi-like behaviour of the police calling at the house of Allison Pearson.
Is she as concerned as I am about the Stasi-like interview that was given to Alison Pearson, the Daily Telegraph journalist?
It's a live investigation and therefore it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on that. But I do believe that we should have a free press. It's part of our democracy and we should have free speech. But with that comes responsibility of those that do it.
And I really feel, Liam, that this should not be a tribal matter. No one expressing an opinion in a free society, unless it's let's all meet for a riot tomorrow morning, should get a knock on the door from the police. And I think we should be defending that across the pass. And I have to say, we can talk about in more detail about the alleged offending tweet, but the non-crime hate incidents, this bizarre Orwellian term, which was one of the things I was originally apparently accused of, or now they're saying it's a criminal investigation. Yes, even Liam, that whatever, it seems to be a little bit of confusion about what the actual accusation against me is. Essex Police said they didn't say non-crime hate incident on my doorstep, although their edited transcript that they presented to a newspaper certainly does contain the word incident. And I don't think the two coppers on my doorstep were particularly clear about what indeed the charge was. But just to establish for the listeners that it's been made very clear in the case law, notably in the Court of Appeal, that free speech should trump almost any other consideration. That's what one of the most senior courts in the land has said. And indeed, the non-crime hate incident is really supposed to be about nipping in the bud people who may go on to present a really much more violent and terrible threat to society, including the 9-year-old child to whom they gave a non-crime hate incident for bandying about one of those words we used to say in the playground, Liam, and indeed your co-pilot, who, as we know, presents a tremendous threat of incipient violence to almost nobody except her co-pilot when he needs a bit of a slapping down. Boot up the bum. Yes.
I got the scars on my back.
Don't put boot up
Alleged
the bum.
boot up the bum. Alleged boot up the bum.
Alleged.
A non-crime boot up the bum.
A non-crime boot up the bum. We mustn't be putting that on Twitter. So, yeah, I mean, we are going to talk about this in depth. But you said to me earlier in the week that I seem to oscillate between sometimes I'm very upset and then sometimes I'm really angry and defiant, because there is this extraordinary sense that it's both absolutely ludicrous and incredibly serious, isn't it?
Somebody I trust very much inquired of you this morning, and I said to her, Alison veers between being utterly determined and very scared. And I think that's roughly where you are. Mm. I have shed tears on your behalf. I feel the pressure that you're under vicariously, and we live quite near each other, but I haven't physically seen you this week, right?
No.
And I must say, on Tuesday night, I was at an award ceremony for the Excellent Centre for Social Justice, which you know is Ian Duncan Smith's think tank. A refreshingly cross-party crowd were there. That's the kind of think tank the Centre for Social Justice is, working with charities across the country. And most of my evening was dealing with a queue of people who were coming up to me asking about how you were and giving you support and endorsement. And I sent you many of the screenshots of the messages that they sent to me. This really has caught a wave. What happened to you has caught a wave amidst a news tsunami. Look what's happening in Ukraine. Look what's happening, in the transition from Biden to Trump. Look what's happening on the streets of London with the farmers' protest. Inflation just gone up from 1.7% to 2.3%. These are very big news events. And yet that visit to your doorstep in the Essex market town where we both live by 2 police officers is really gripping the public's imagination, because there's so much outrage at what this means for free speech in Britain. And I have to say, while we have been literally inundated in the Planet Normal inbox, and while some journalists who disagree with you have absolutely stepped up to defend you and your right to free speech, not least the excellent Suzanne Moore, who was, of course, previously a Guardian columnist. Now she's at The Telegraph. She's written, the classic column. I often disagree with Allison Pearson, but I absolutely defend her right to free speech. And yet there have been lots of snidey journalists who have been, I wonder if they are temperamentally really journalists, given that they don't seem to understand the dangers that this presents to freedom of expression. You're not a free speech absolutist, and nor am I. We all recognise the limits. We've spent our adult lives knowing where the line is and testing and bending the line from time to time. That's what good opinion writers do. But for me, this was Orwellian. This was and is Kafkaesque. The fact that you can't even know precisely the tweet that is alleged to have been problematic, the fact that you can't know that though we are working on the identity of the person who made the accusation, it is insane. I mean, this is the country of Magna Carta. I don't understand how this can happen in Britain. And it's absolutely clear the world is watching.
Yeah, it's very odd to get emails and phone calls from around the world from places where you would formerly have thought they had a problem with authoritarianism, to have them asking me on to talk about Mad Britain, where free speech has been taken away, is a very strange sensation, Liam. And I have to say that, a lot of people say, oh, you're so brave. Well, yes and no. I'm not relishing the role of free speech martyr, but I do think if someone's got to take a hit for the team, it might as well be me. But on the other hand, when you see headlines and you turn on the radio, used to turning on Radio 4, and you've got Allison Pearson hate tweet, Pearson racist incident, it's really horrible because you think, oh, people will assume the worst. They'll think, oh, no smoke without fire. And as you know, Liam, I've spent the last 13 months fighting a form of racism, which is the grotesque anti-Semitism, which we've seen on our streets. I'm giving a big speech tomorrow night in London. And that's going to be quite odd because digging down a bit deeper, we have to ask about the motives of what's going on here. So can I just say quickly to Planet Normal listeners who haven't seen what's going on here, that just to try and recap quickly, the Remembrance Sunday the previous year, last year, along with the group I co-founded, British Friends of Israel, which was co-founded in the aftermath of the 7th of October Hamas massacres, we assembled under the Winston Churchill statue on Armistice Day, and we invited Jews and Planet Normal listeners to join us, as many of them did. And we asked a couple of coppers there, police constables, to join us for a selfie, and they were quite off with us and didn't want to, perhaps because we had an Israeli flag or something. But anyway, I didn't think any more about it. And then about a week or so later, I saw on Twitter, someone had copied me in on a picture of police with what looked like a sort of Gaza Palestine type of march and so on. And the person said, looked like they picked a side. So I then tweeted a bit offhandedly, how dare they, wouldn't join the British Friends of Israel for a photograph, but perfectly happy to pose with the Jew haters. Now, some people might think that's a bit intemperate or whatever. The point I was making, Liam, very clearly, and many senior policemen and very senior lawyers, including a law lord and a former Solicitor General, have said that tweet was very clearly addressing criticism of two-tier policing, which was a concern back then, and you will know has become even more of a concern now. Were the police being entirely even-handed in their treatment of the pro-Palestine marches, given the mounting fears within the Jewish community? So I posted that, and within very, very swiftly, this is a memory, if memory serves, really quickly, it came up that that's not a photograph from now. That's from whatever, a year or so ago, and it's in Manchester, not the Met in London. So I did what Keir Starmer had advised to do when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions. He said, if you make a mistake on social media, you should just delete the tweet. So I deleted the tweet, and the period of time that it was up would have been really a very narrow window in which my accuser would have had time to be offended. Now, I would suggest that I can't remember any riots that were inspired by my tweet, co-pilot, or indeed anything else. And as I said, I've been speaking with, in fact, this week, 2 very senior police officers who've said that they are utterly bewildered at what Essex Police is doing. They cannot see the basis for a non-crime hate incident, let alone a criminal investigation. You know, Liam, that they called in the Gold Group, which is Essex's sort of terrorist fighting squad, because you know your Welsh co-pilot, all me in my stocking feet. But anyway, so that's just a quick snapshot of what the accusation arose from. I staunchly maintain that there is no way that was inciting racial hatred. And I'm very happy to hear that Muslim friends, Asian friends, Black friends just think it's, as one of our lovely near neighbours says, that's bollocks, that is. So I think that we are in a country where the vast majority of people would like the police to come round if there's a burglary or if someone's been assaulted or had their phone taken, instead of which we know now, because of my case, we know now there's a huge focus of police attention on these alleged hate crime incidents, wholly disproportionate. And we've got Neil Gregory, who's got in touch, counsellor in our area. And Neil is a member of the Essex Police Fire and Crime Panel, who very kindly came round to my door to offer support. Neil, Liam, has observed Essex senior officers at close quarters, and he alleges that they are, quotes, hell-bent in their pursuit of a progressive nirvana. He says they are contemptuous of Essex residents who would like the police to come round, not just email a crime number. And he says that they much prefer to focus on trans rights, on getting drag queens in to Chelmsford Police Headquarters, investigating non-crime hate incidents or racially or religiously motivated cases. Now, so what we've got the higher echelons of the police, not the bobbies on the beat, who are often really, really good and know what the job should be. But we've got these graduates from the College of Policing who are more interested in social justice than actual justice. And I think this is a far cry from what we require of the police, which is catching the bad guys and making the world a safe place for our children.
This reminds me of that new concept, what we call lawfare.
Yeah.
You know, when the Democrats in the States went after Trump when he was president and when he was a candidate and so on, using the legal system to try and drum him out of the legitimate democratic and rhetorical contest that is our election system. And this is like a form of lawfare on the British public as a whole, these non-crime hate incidents, because it strikes me, journalists that have been slapped with them and people on social media who have been slapped with them, they tend to be those tweeting and writing more from a centre-right perspective. Maybe we're feeling a bit paranoid, but that does seem to be a pattern there. And I genuinely think, Allison, I'm chancing my arm here saying this while we're recording, something that we've talked about a lot over the last week. I think if you're strong enough to withstand this, and I know that is absolutely not a given, even with the huge amount of support that you've had from the public, if you're strong enough to withstand this, and as and when it becomes clear, which I am absolutely sure it will, that you are legally in the clear and any threat of prosecution or worse hanging over your head is removed, there is now such a head of steam about this issue that I genuinely believe we're in a position where these measures, which were introduced under a Conservative government, by the way, could be drummed off the statute book. And I'd mentioned the excellent Graham Stringer, who isn't just some sort of Labour renegade. He's a really thoughtful bloke on the Labour benches. He speaks for a lot of red wall voters when he talks. He's more kind of old school Labour than sort of Tony Blair, Islington, Keir Starmer Labour. There is a wellspring of support for you. And I think if you can withstand the pressure and others get behind you, I genuinely think this could be a pivotal moment in terms of these particular measures on the statute book that have been highlighted by your plight have caused enormous outrage. And I think this is going to put the Labour government and Keir Starmer, as a former director of public prosecutions, under serious pressure to literally change the legislation.
One of the many upsetting things, you know me, co-pilot, I am a law-abiding citizen. I was a sixer of the Pixies, right? I don't like feeling I'm on the other side to the police.
Yeah.
But what choice do you have? We had a former cabinet minister texted me this week. He says, it's incredible, really, that people like us have come to look at the police in this way. That's what I feel. It's absolutely incredible. And so this is hugely corrosive of trust in the police. And I think one of the things Telegraph is investigating 3 allegations now of anti-Semitism within Essex Police. We had a Jewish listener emailing to tell us that she complained to the police about a tweet which talked about Jewish genocide, supremacy, etc. And an Essex police officer wrote back saying that although they were sorry that she had felt offended, they wouldn't be pursuing the author of that tweet because feelings were running high at the time. Well, feelings were running bloody high at the time when I posted my tweet, weren't they? But that didn't stop them sending some coppers round. And we actually, rather amazingly, got a message from a former Essex hate crime officer who said that there was a problem with anti-Semitism in the force. And they mentioned one occasion when they insisted to a senior officer that a particular tweet merited some further investigation. And the senior officer asked the person, "Are you Israeli?" So I think, I'm afraid to say, and this is a very, very sad and fearful conclusion, is that these graduates from the College of Policing who are completely captured, Liam, by woke ideology, by diversity, equity and inclusion, seem to now see their job as defending minorities against the majority white population. So we, making a complaint, would, and again, this is an allegation which seems to be being borne out by people, we would get less respect and attention to our complaints than one coming from a favoured minority group, which is what Councillor Neil Gregory said, that it is the mainly favoured ethnic communities that get their attention. And that clearly, with Essex Police, doesn't seem to include Jews. Now, you and I, we've got friends of all backgrounds and nationalities. I think this is massively divisive, okay? We have achieved a remarkably harmonious and tolerant society. People came to this country. People have fled to Britain because it was the fair country. It was the country of free speech. You didn't get a knock on the door in the middle of the night. In fact, Boris Johnson, I can highly recommend. Boris wrote a beautiful column in my defence in the Mail on Saturday. And he recalled when we were children, we used to hear these tales, didn't we, from behind the Iron Curtain. Oh my God, people can't speak freely, even around the family table. We've had stories coming into Planet Normal of people on calls to call centres who make a whispered remark to their husband, which is then picked up and recorded by the call centre. And the police come around because the person's made an aside that's considered unpleasant to their own partner. We cannot have this. We cannot have this.
It's like that film about the former East Germany, The Lives of Others.
One of my favourite films.
Brilliant movie.
Do you see what I'm saying? And also, let's get back to the metropolitan liberal elite, because they were so rude about me on The Newsagents podcast, Emily Maitlis, John Sopel, Lewis Goodall. Let's address what they said, that I had a persecution complex. Oh dear, what could possibly be wrong about a journalist having a call from police when she said something that offends against the Emily Maitlis view of the world? Well, Emily Maitlis, John Sopel, Lewis Goodall, the majority of people in this country don't share your liberal echo chamber views. They share the views of Liam Halligan and Allison Pearson. And you accusing me, there's someone in The Guardian, hysterical, calm down, dear. Sorry, I'm not even allowed to swear on my podcast, and I will not deface the precious oxygen in the planet normal rocket. But these people should look in the mirror. Sopel and Mateless, they are from Jewish backgrounds. Who has been out there every week defending British Jews? Not them, because that's not a fashionable cause in Holland Park, where Emily Mateless lives, is it? It's not a fashionable cause at all. But some of us have to take a stand on vile hatred in our society. And this bunch of liberal lefty journalists who think because they despise my views, Brexit, anti-lockdown, all the things that they think are sort of below the, past the smelling salts, Duchess. Well, guess what? Someone has to stick up for things. And if I have to stick up for free speech when a bunch of highly paid journalists, former BBC journalists, despise me and call me hysterical with a persecution complex, we should have a persecution complex if members of our police are going to journalist doors. It is, as Kemia Badenoch said, when she was interviewed for The Telegraph, it is totally unacceptable.
I tell you what, Alison, everyone listening to this can hear the passion in your voice and hear what this means to you. And they should understand that we're fighting here for free speech, not absolute free speech, but we're fighting for the notion that offence is not an offence. Offence is not an offence. We have to be able to say things that are near the bone. We have to be able to say things that sometimes rub people up the wrong way. And I refer again to the excellent Suzanne Moore. She had it exactly right. Link to her column in the show notes to this episode. I don't agree with everything that Alison Pearson says, but I will defend her right to free speech. That was what the Enlightenment was about. We're centuries on, and we seem not to have learnt those lessons.
Do you think, though, I wonder, pulling back to the bigger picture, we have this multicultural society, which is now, with mass immigration, is running into various problems. And I still think, really, that the political class has underestimated the challenges that was going to present. And they can't work it out. They've got no idea what to do, really, about communities. Some communities, not many, but there are, among our communities, there are some people who despise our way of life and who don't wish to join in. So let's just give an example of the marvellous Essex Police, who this week decided that an imam who had in a sermon in the mosque had said, basically, destroy all Zionists, one of those, not something that I ever advocated, going around destroying anyone's homes. But the imam, no further cause for investigation. Alison Pearson, respectable, Telegraph columnist, let's send 2 coppers round. This is an astonishing, jaw-dropping double standard. And I think they cannot reconcile these problems. I just want to say, Liam, actually, really fascinating. I was talking to a friend from a Muslim background, and the friend said, these extremists, the Islamists, they've ruined my religion, right? So there are millions of Muslims who are decent people. They want their children to grow up in a good society. They want all the things that we want. They don't want to live in silos like these people. Roger Hurst, who is the Commissioner for Police in Essex, who went on LBC and was talking about my case. He actually mentioned crimes. I haven't been accused of a crime, Mr. Hurst. But he talked about my tweet. He said we have to think about how that was heard in our Black and Asian communities. That is everything that's wrong with this society, right? My Black and Asian friends in our area, they don't think they're living in communities. They think they live in Essex. They're proud to be British. They are fully signed up members of the community. They don't live in this diversity parallel universe that Essex Police thinks exists. And as I said, I think it's very difficult, Liam. So where we are, just quickly, so listeners know, got a very nice solicitor who's come via the Free Speech Union. And Luke has advised me to offer to go into the police station for a voluntary interview. Now, I could have refused to engage with the process, largely because I think the process is wrong, unfair, and ludicrous. But if I refuse to engage, and I don't think anyone should be going through this, okay, on the basis of something they put on social media. Of course, there is a chance, Liam, that Essex Police might ignore this tidal wave of outrage and criticism that has been rolling over them and come and arrest me. Do I want to put my family through that? No, I don't. So the plan is, wait for it, if I am called for an interview to the Essex Police headquarters, we will, of course, alert the media. I know this has been a tumultuous episode. I was asking myself, is there anything good that can come out of what's been unbelievably upsetting and pressurised time? Yes, there is, because we've heard from people around the country, midwives, small business people, truck drivers, business people, you name it. We've heard that they have experienced this Kafkaesque ordeal, which makes people feel ashamed and embarrassed because they don't like to get in trouble with the police. So if today, Liam, there is a hate crime officer in the country who has got a case in front of him of one of these people who said something stupid or rude at work, or who retweeted something with a not very thoughtful or kind aside, if that police officer today hesitates to inflict on that man or woman, or indeed child, okay, if that police officer thinks that Allison Pearson case, that's been making a lot of difficult headlines, maybe we won't go after Josh or Hayley or Chloe. Maybe we won't do that today. I did a good thing, didn't I?
Now on to this week's Planet Normal Stowaway, a guest talking about something other than the madness of non-crime hate incidents, or should that be alleged madness. Ruchir Sharma is an investment strategist, fund manager, author and newspaper columnist who's worked at some of the world's leading institutional investors, not least in the US. Having grown up in India and Singapore, Sharma's expertise extends across the entire global economy, and he came to prominence with his 2012 book, Breakout Nations, In Pursuit of the Next Economic Miracles, an international bestseller. Sharma is that rare beast, a seriously knowledgeable economist who understands financial markets and who can convey complex ideas in a simple way. His writing is part travelogue, part sociology, but always with a strong core of sharp economic analysis. In 2016, Ruchir Sharma released The Rise and Fall of Nations, Forces of Change in the Post-Crisis World, and his latest book, which I can highly recommend, is What Went Wrong with Capitalism, published earlier this year. I started by asking Ruchir Sharma to tell us, in a nutshell, what did go wrong?
Well, as I argue in the book, that capitalism did not fail, as is widely believed by a large section of the young in particular, and today, that capitalism did not fail, it was ruined. And I make the point that it was ruined by the heavy hand of the government. As they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So the government has been trying to get more and more involved in the economy, thinking that they are fixing some of the underlying problems. And what I show in the book is that over time, those interventions have only made things worse. So that really, I think, is the tagline, that capitalism did not fail, it was ruined by big government.
Now, you spent more than 20 years in the US. A lot of this book is about the US economic history, though you draw in all kinds of examples from around the world, not least from the UK as well. I know you watch the UK economy very, very closely. At the turn of this century, Ruchir, UK government spending, which is a sort of general size of the state measure, UK government spending in the year 2000 was 35% of GDP. During the COVID pandemic lockdown, it went all the way up to 55% of GDP. Government spending was bigger than private sector spending when the economy was locked down. But rather than going back to that kind of historically average 35%, Britain generally being a small government state, we now seem post-lockdown to have settled on 45% of GDP as government spending. How and why did that happen?
Well, I think that this is a general trend that's been happening across the Western world. And UK, of course, is one of the more extreme examples, partly because it doesn't even raise enough taxes to cover the deficit. And just to put this in historical perspective, the UK is a country for which records go back the most, and we have records, as I cite in the book, going back to the 1690s, that the UK never ran a peacetime deficit until the 1970s. And then it has run a deficit in all but of the last 50 years. That's quite a change that we have seen. And so we have seen this trend where it's much easier to increase spending and harder to raise taxes to match it, although the UK has tried to do both. But I think the more important point here, if I can say so, is that it's not just about government spending that's the problem in terms of the suite of government habits. It's got to do with that if you look at the amount of regulation, if you look at the culture of bailing out private sector companies, if you look at the micromanagement of the business cycle, I think it's the entire suite of government habits that's what's leading to a very distorted form of capitalism that we have today around the world, including in the UK.
We are in a situation in the UK where we very, very rarely actually raise enough taxation to finance the spending that the government's done. As you said, in my lifetime, and I'm a sort of sprightly 55-year-old, I think in only 2 years have we run tiny surpluses, I think 1989 and 1999, and only then on certain definitions. How did we get to the point where it seems politically and morally acceptable to keep running these huge budget deficits every year, which of course the government must borrow to finance? Our national debt as now the stock of our borrowing, the sum of all previous deficits that we haven't yet paid off. That's now 100% of GDP, bigger than the economy itself. And in the UK, we're paying 90 odd billion pounds a year on debt interest, more than we spend on schools. How can this be politically sustainable? And why don't more people talk about this?
Well, I think because there are no apparent consequences, right? Which is that when do governments change their behavior? When do people align behind governments to change behavior? It's when you have a full-on crisis. You had a bit of that in the 1970s and you got some change in the 1980s, but it was sort of very quickly reversed. So I think that in terms of, unless you end up getting a crisis, behavior doesn't really change. And that's what we've seen across the Western world as well, that a lot of people cite the example of Scandinavia as these big welfare states with lots of government spending. But even those countries, led by Sweden, had to dial back when they got into a crisis in the 1990s. Similarly, in the last decade, Greece has been a case in point of a country that had to dial back and cut spending and privatize when it got into trouble. So unless a country really gets into big financial trouble because of the deficits, there is no real incentive for people to cut back on spending, and it's very easy to spend other people's money, and so therefore the trend continues. What I try to do here in the book is show that there are insidious effects of this, that there may not be apparent effects like an outright crisis, but there are insidious sort of consequences of this, which include a decline in productivity growth. That if you look at places like UK, productivity growth over the last few decades has effectively fallen to zero. And that is, I think, a major consequence of the fact that capitalism is not working effectively. You have so much government intervention, whether it's government spending, regulation, or propping up zombie companies, that are undermining productivity growth, and that's also undermining economic growth. So that's the point I try to make in this book, which is the fact that there are insidious consequences of such actions. Government spending is one facet of the government's role and effect on the economy, but we have to look at it in total. And here in sum, there are all these other effects which are badly distorting capitalism.
I want to come on to the US in the moment, and in particular US history, but just sticking with the UK for now. I mean, it's my experience, Ruchir, that an entire generation pretty much of both leading politicians, including people from both parties I've spoken to who are cabinet ministers over recent years, it seems that a whole generation of politicians and journalists has forgotten that in 1976, a big spending British government had to be bailed out by the IMF. This is what happens, isn't it?
Right.
Because financial markets, investors simply either refuse to lend to profligate governments, or they only lend at very, very punitive rates of interest. What are the chances? You don't have to name names, but do you think we could see some kind of systemic crisis in the Western world at some stage over the coming years, given the extent to which governments are borrowing and spending?
Well, at the margin, that's already happening, because when you had very low inflation and very low interest rates that accompanied that for the last couple of decades, it seemed as though there was no consequence to such borrowing, that the interest rates were very low, close to zero, and you could keep borrowing with no real consequences. I think that very low interest rate regime is now behind us. So that has changed. And so therefore, the so-called bond vigilantes that you referred to, the financial markets, which have given governments a very easy pass because of the fact that central banks have been flooding the system with so much money, so much liquidity, interest rates have been very low, that because the markets have been so relaxed about all of this, the governments have been able to run these deficits without any apparent consequences, beginning to change. We saw that in 2022 in UK. Now we're seeing that in even countries like France this year, where the spreads are widening out, the spreads between their government borrowing compared to, let's say, countries such as Germany.
Which shouldn't happen in a single currency area, should it? You shouldn't have
exactly
spreads between the bond yields, the government debt, interest rates of different member states in a currency union.
Yeah, but I think that that's what's happening. And I think that France has been even more profligate than the UK. And France is that government spending as a share of GDP is approaching 60%, possibly the second highest in the world after North Korea. So when you get to those kind of levels, I think that you begin to see much more of a revolt. So I think that we have in general seen a change in the interest rate regime and behavior, where we have higher rates around the world just now. And I think that is likely to persist. And so the markets are going to be much less tolerant of these kind of deficits. So we're seeing the pressure build up in core European countries. We've seen the pressure build up in UK. And I won't be surprised next year, I think the US deficit also blows out to possibly 7 to 8% of GDP. And I think that's when a lot of attention will turn to that, who's financing these deficits, and the bond market is going to be a lot less tolerant of these kind of fiscal excesses.
But the US is different, isn't it? The US is an exception. The US, to paraphrase Charles de Gaulle, can print hard currency. It has the exorbitant privilege of being able to print dollars, which the rest of the world respects and stores wealth in. This so-called reserve currency status, could even that be abused? Could even the US get into financial and economic trouble?
Well, it's happened. If you look at the history of the world, that the world has had a reserve currency change every 100 years or so. The UK had a similar privilege 100 years ago until the US displaced it. Before that, it was France, and before that, it was Spain, Portugal.
So what replaces the dollar, Ruchir? Will that happen in our lifetime?
You know, that's a much more difficult thing. I think that what has really helped the US at the margin is that the obvious replacements such as China and even the euro, both those have even bigger troubles than the US does. And that's given the US a much more of a free ride. So I think that is the big change which we are dealing with, that there is no clear alternative, but you keep abusing the system too much and some alternative will emerge. So we are seeing currently the price of gold do much better than it should be doing based on fundamentals. Even some of these cryptocurrencies and stuff, there's a bit of a feeling of that we need to own something with more limited supply. So I agree that there is no perfect alternative. Nothing is there as a single alternative just now, but you're beginning to see around the edges some of this emerge, whether it's gold, crypto, or even some of the smaller nations' currencies, from the Swiss franc to even the Australian dollar. We're seeing their share in global foreign exchange reserves increase. So something is afoot, but yeah, because the main rivals to the US have been in even bigger trouble this decade, the US obviously has a much freer ride, and American exceptionalism seems to grow bigger and bigger.
Now, the heart of the book is an incredible romp through particularly US economic history, which I must say I find fascinating, particularly that Gilded Age era at the end of the 19th century, when you had the so-called muckrakers, the pioneering journalists attacking the so-called robber barons, recalling that medieval phrase, the likes of Rockefeller, the likes of Carnegie, Vanderbilt, American capitalists who built up very, very powerful positions, even monopolies, some would say, when it came to petroleum, when it came to steel, when it came to some kind of transportation. Do you worry, Ruchir, as I do now, that across the Western world, some companies, particularly tech companies, have become so big that we need another era of so-called trust busting? We had that, didn't we, at the turn of the century in the US under Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, of course, unlike his Democrat cousin Franklin Roosevelt, who was operating, of course, in the 1930s. Do you worry that one reason capitalism is going wrong is because some companies are getting too powerful and they need to be brought down to size in the same way that the American political establishment did at the turn of the 20th century?
Yes, I mean, I have a whole chapter in the book devoted to this about the rise of oligopolies, and I say this is, happening across industries. But I think there are 2 points I'll make here. One, that I'm broadly against more government intervention because I think that's been the cause of the problem in the first place. Having said that, I think that the problem of antitrust is something which the government does need to deal with. That these companies are making supernormal profits, and their supernormal profits are allowing them to play a predatory role in the economic.
And it also allows them to lobby government very heavily and give ex-government officials and ex-government advisors nice jobs. So the status quo remains.
That's right. But I think that this is a very important point that you raise up, that let's say that we even break down these oligopolies, but we need to get back to what is the root cause. How did this happen? How did these companies get into such a position? And how do we prevent this from happening in the next 5 or 10 years? Because if we break them down today, but we don't change the underlying soil, then something else is going to rise in a similar way. And we'll be dealing with the same problem 5, 10 years from now. So we'll be playing whack-a-mole in a way. So I think that what I point out in the book is that a major reason why these companies have gotten bigger is because of government regulation. That you have to understand that government regulation by definition tends to be pro-incumbent and tends to help the established already, because when you impose so much regulation, the incumbents, and especially the large incumbents with big war chests, they're able to pay the price for complying with those regulations, and you're creating a barrier to entry for new people to come in. And as you also point out, that when you have new regulation, then it gives the opportunity for these established players to sort of use their army of lobbyists in Washington, whom only they can afford, to write the regulation that favors them. So I think that this perverse effect of regulation is something we need to study much more deeply, that why did we get to this first place? Because it's not just happening in the tech sector. This is happening across industries in both US and Europe, where you're seeing increased concentration. And I think that the massive role that regulation has played, I know this, for example, in the US, even if you want to set up a new fund, let's say like a new investment fund, the cost of doing so in the 20 years that I've been in America has gone up 10 times. So it becomes very difficult for you as an independent player then to survive, because the cost has gone up so much and the threshold for breaking even is much higher. Whereas if you're a large firm, a large established player, it's fine. They're able to survive that because they're able to easily pay the costs of it. It's a small dot on their balance sheet. So I think that when we are talking about oligopolies, we need to speak as much about the government effect rather than just the network effect in terms of what's causing them to dominate in this manner.
You cite many people in the book. There's lots of references to economists like John Maynard Keynes, Milton Friedman and others. You also cite that former US presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, a man very much of the left. Bernie Sanders said today's capitalism is socialism for the very rich. And Bernie Sanders had a point, didn't he? Particularly in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, where a lot of very wealthy people involved in banking, it seems that they made big bets and the government bailed them out.
Yes, but I think the point that I make there, as well is the fact that Bernie Sanders has a point, but he's half right, because as I said, that the solutions they offer, I think, are going to make the problems worse. So I agree with the basic point that we have socialism for the rich, but we have now, I feel that everyone's on state support, the middle classes or even the lower income people, where we've seen welfare benefits increased exponentially in places like the US over the last 20, 30 years, that everyone seems to be on state support. But the basic point is that risk has been socialized. I think that's the core argument of the book, which is the fact that on the upside, we seem to have capitalism where you can capitalize the profits, but the losses seem to be socialized, where the moment the system runs into even the slightest hint of trouble, or any company or any major financial institution having the slightest hint of trouble, the government rides to the rescue. So you have this very asymmetric profile where on the upside, there's no upside, limit to the amount of profits you make. On the downside, the government's there to protect you and to make sure that your losses are socialized. So I think that is the fundamental problem I have with the capitalist system today, that by definition, capitalism is supposed to be pro-competition. It's supposed to be pro-churn.
That's what makes it work for consumers and taxpayers, right? When there is competition.
Yes. But instead, I think what we have today, is capitalism that's become much more pro-big business, and it's become pro-incumbent. And that's why it is malfunctioning.
Ruchir Sharma, thanks so much for appearing on Planet Normal. Sometimes, Allison, you get to know somebody, you look at their work and you think, God, I wish I was doing that. This guy, Ruchir Sharma, is a really very interesting economist.
Yeah.
He basically travels around the world. He looks at different countries, and his writing, as I said, it's part travelogue. It's quite folksy, but always underneath the very, very strong writing, and he is a very good writer, is a proper market-facing, extremely experienced financial and political economist. I really can't recommend his books highly enough. And for somebody of his stature to be raising questions now about the sustainability of the massive increase we've seen in government spending and government debt across the world. Government debt now is far, far higher, not least since lockdown, than it was in the run-up to the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And that's basically what this book is about. Ruchir Sharma is saying that capitalism has got to a point when there isn't enough competition. He says it's pro-incumbent and pro-big business. What does that mean? It means there are too many what we call oligopolies, too many cartels, too many big businesses that have become so powerful that the free market and proper competition and a good deal for consumers is being subjugated, if you like, by massive vested interests. In this vein, he's writing in the tradition of a long line of economists, from Adam Smith through to David Ricardo, through to a Swedish economist, post-war economist who've massively interested me as a kid, a guy called Magnus Olsson. And again, we need public intellectuals like this who really know what they're talking about, looking at the big picture. And he's not necessarily a typical Planet Normal guest, but I'm delighted that we've had him on.
Well, I love listening to you guys, two great economists, Ruchir Sharma and Liam Halligan, talking. I hesitate to drag it back to my new best friend.
You're toying with me, co-pilot. You're just upset because we had a Planet Normal email, which you may or may not have put in the emails, where I was described in a certain way by one of our lady fans.
It wasn't that handsome word, was it? No, let's this is a serious point. Elon and Vivek Ramaswamy.
Oh, it's Elon now, is it? It's not Elon Musk.
It's not Elon Musk. It's my new bestie. But in the States, they are going to be running Doge, aren't they? They're going to be running the Department of Government Efficiency. So this is going to be fascinating because we are going to see this great Western economy subject to two business brains trying to cut public spending. Now, as you know, Halligan, I am such a keen student, a SWAT in the Halligan School of Economics, that above my computer
it's a picture of me.
It's a picture of you
With a dart in my forehead.
with looking handsome with your immaculate mane of hair. And it says, Liam, national debt 2.5 trillion, 47% of GDP now goes on government spending. And can we just do a very quick Velma stat?
Scooby-Doo, Shaggy.
So the Office for National Statistics this week, public service productivity in quarter 2, 2024, estimated to be 8.5% below its pre-pandemic peak in the last quarter, December 2019. This is absolutely dreadful. And I think, referring to, as you say, Ruchir Sharma's, amazing book and so on, the governments are scared now, aren't they, of the public, of voters, because really we can't go on spending this much of our national wealth on public services, particularly in the UK, where they don't really work, do they? You don't get value for money from our health service, our roads, our rail, and so on. So we're spending this vast amount of money with, as you've often said to me, Liam, servicing this huge debt where, that terrible statistic, we spend more on servicing the debt than we do on schooling for our children. And you do wonder whether we will get Elon Musk. Will the future Conservative government led by Kemi Badenoch have the guts to level with the public? And indeed, did you see, actually, we just come quickly to this marvellous farmers march in London, where Jeremy Clarkson, when Victoria Derbyshire from Newsnight said to him, oh, well, Rachel Reeves has said that she needs to whack this huge wad of inheritance tax on farmers to raise money for the NHS, ha, ha, ha. And Clarkson, in absolutely brilliant Jeremy fashion, gestured at all the buildings around them in Whitehall and said, cut some of these.
The real problem is, in this country, that we are consistently spending, our governments of all stripes are consistently spending far, far more than we raise in taxation. As I say, in my lifetime, we've only ever run an annual surplus where taxes exceed government spending twice. That means we have to borrow loads of money each year. And this is what Ruchir Sharma's saying, and it's relevant, I think, to Labour's time in office so far. Rachel Reeves did her budget, and all eyes are on the £25 billion tax increase, employer national insurance. It is a tax on jobs. It will lead to inflation. The increase in the minimum wage will lead to inflation. We've already had an increase in inflation from 1.7 to 2.3% in October on the latest numbers. That's partly also due to an increase in the energy price cap, pushing up gas and electricity bills for firms and households. But at the same time, that £25 billion increase in taxation was spent entirely, and more was needed to be borrowed in order to pay the increase in debt service charges because of her other borrowing for her other measures. It's not enough to say, I want to borrow and spend this money because it's the right thing to do, and if you don't agree with me, you're nasty. The government has to understand that there are limits to what you can spend, and to govern is to choose. And there comes a point where financial markets will say, right, you're not going to spend any more, or if you are going to spend any more, we're going to charge you a very, very high rate of interest. And we've got in a situation now where the Bank of England's lowering interest rates, saying we're in charge, but the financial markets are raising interest rates for what governments have to pay to borrow. And they are the interest rates, those 10-year gilt yields, which actually act as the real benchmark for all other loans across the economy, with mortgages, car loans, and all the rest of it. And to have a situation, as we have now in the UK, where the Bank of England is pulling interest rates in one direction and the market's pulling interest rates in the other, guess what? Here's a lesson from history. The market always wins. And this is my concern. It's my concern that it's 1975, not 1997. 1975, the year before, we had a proper bond market meltdown in this country, and the UK had to be rescued, bailed out by the International Monetary Fund. Now, I've got to be very careful about pressing this theme. I'm a prominent national newspaper columnist, particularly when it comes to the economy. But I'm reflecting conversations I am having with people who literally trade and manage portfolios with tens of billions of pounds of government debt of all countries in them. Labour cannot go on spending like this. And a lot of their tax measures seem to be unravelling. They're ideologically driven tax measures. It gives me no pleasure to say any of this, but there have to be some people in our public life, in our media, who issue these warnings. You can't just keep on taxing and borrowing. It doesn't work. That is the main lesson of economic history.
Brilliantly well said. And let's just think about the fact that Labour is taking as much as it can from the productive, often to give to the unproductive. And I think of my great-grandparents were Welsh hill farmers, like all farmers, up in the dark every morning, working 7 days a week, no holidays, milking the cows, Liam, and they all of their names began with an M. Marigold, Maureen, Mary, all the lovely cows. And here, a Welsh hill farmer says, last year I was on a salary of £12,000 and my parents were on £20,000. It's not an awful lot. Labour just don't want to know us.
Now on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We learn so much from you, the citizens of Planet Normal. And the Telegraph's servers have been groaning under the weight of all the messages that have come in for you, Alison. It really is quite phenomenal. And may I say again, incredibly moving.
Celia says, Dear Alison, you must not be afraid. You know that you've done nothing wrong. Fear is a weapon that authoritarian organisations use to subject people, hence your early morning callers on a day of rest and national remembrance. We're all behind you and with you, but you must stand firm, refuse to be intimidated, see it for what it is. It's an attack on free speech. You are the strong, articulate one, the clever one with words. The pen is indeed mightier than the sword. Love, Celia. And this is from Kit. Dear Alison and Liam, I'm an avid listener and fan of Planet Normal. It is highly likely that Alison has received masses of messages and support from far and wide. One reason being that the vast majority of folk are decent and law-abiding and readily see the injustice of what is happening to Allison. Another is because she is the person she is. It is literally impossible to comprehend what is going on today. It's self-evident that what was right and lawful is being turned on its head. Who on earth can tell how anything will turn out? As you look around, you realise how uncertain life is becoming. I do feel very much for Allison and her family. I imagine how my family and I would cope if this happened to us. Allison, you are a wonderful journalist, says Kit, and I have long enjoyed reading and listening to you. You have so much heartfelt support. This may not sound much, but it really is. The nightmare will come to an end. I very much hope that when it does, you will be able to pick up the threads of your life and be your unique self again. Wishing you the best, as ever, Kit.
This is from Miranda. Alison, you helped many of us through nonsensical COVID lockdowns with the brilliant Planet Normal, along with Liam. I get a mention. Now it's our turn to support you in your hour of need. Keep going. Your doggedness, wisdom and all-round right thinking are so deeply appreciated in these crazy times. I've no doubt at all that you will emerge head and shoulders above the idiots you are currently forced to deal with. I think she's referring to me there. Horrible for you to have to endure so much frightening nonsense.
That really is you.
Yeah. But perhaps some good will come of it in the end. Warmest wishes, Miranda. It's also worth saying, Alison, and we've been highlighting emails to each other all week, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
And we have had many emails from serving and former police officers who are tearing their hair out about what is happening. And this is from two ex-coppers. This is from Angela. I believe that it's been a gradual process stemming from the murder of Stephen Lawrence and the subsequent claims of the police being institutionally racist. The bringing in of legislation relating to hate crime by Blair's government and its prioritisation on any incident deployment list. The police becoming less independent politically and some senior officers being scared of making tough decisions for fear of public criticism as was demonstrated during the pro-Palestine marches. An overemphasis on officers evidencing having dealt with hate crimes during promotion processes. Serious crimes such as burglary, which previously were prioritised, fall down the list under hate crime and domestic violence. The Home Office now dictates where the police focus their priorities, which usually contrasts with the priorities of the public. The recruitment of younger officers on degree schemes, as opposed to a more diverse age range of people having done previous careers such as the armed forces. This, in my opinion, has led to an immature, inexperienced and also a less diverse workforce than I imagined was intended. I work for a constabulary, we're not going to name it. I believe that the issues I've mentioned are amplified massively in forces such as the Met and GMP, the Greater Manchester Police. I could go on. That's Angela, and this is Lenny. I've been horrified by your treatment at the hands of the Essex Police, Allison, and feel ashamed that the British Police I was so proud to serve for 34 years has lost its way so tragically. The lack of vetting and parachuting into senior ranks of virtue signalling graduates who've never seen an angry man or woman is now coming home to roost. I suppose it was inevitable that you would be targeted by the so-called tolerant and kind left. You are one of the few voices who speaks out for the silent and overwhelming majority of British citizens, including, says Lenny, our Jewish community. Please be assured that the majority are right behind you. On a personal note, I look forward to every column you write in the Telegraph. Your own and Gordon Rayner's contributions, here, brilliant reporter, are two reasons I maintain my subscription. I also hugely enjoy your appearances on GB News. Please continue to speak on behalf of us, and for goodness sake, take extra care. There are extremely nasty forces ranging against you.
And just to go on with other police, as I said, we've had, as Liam said, we've had loads of very extraordinary emails from police. This is from Phileas. Ordinary police officers had no place to hide as their interactions with colleagues were scrutinised, watched by the New Thought police, hunting down any officers who didn't think like them. Thousands of police left the force and were replaced by the sanitised robo-cops who couldn't catch a villain in a prison, but who wear rainbow underwear and listen in on their fellow officers for any hint of non-conformity. Witch hunts and Cromwellian Puritanism is the new order. And this is from Maureen. I love this one. Maureen says, as a 92-year-old widow with a fervent love of my king and country, I've been following Allison's case with horror. All my family have fought for their country. I lost my uncle in the First World War and my dear brother as a bomber pilot in the Second. It was what one did. Your case brought tears to my eyes. The freedom that we all won seems to be pointless these days. What appalled me even more was to think that on the most sacred day of my life, Remembrance Sunday, someone would have the gall to come to Allison's house, and as a practicing Christian, on any Sunday, that would have been an affront. God bless Allison. Keep up the good fight.
And Allison, look, we know this episode concerning you is important. It's almost as if Cobra's been scrambled. There's a public inquiry. But what really counts is that Bob the Bard has weighed in on Planet Normal.
Thank goodness.
Dear Planet Normal, just when Allison thought that things couldn't get any worse, I'm afraid that recent events have driven me to write yet another dreadful poem, says Bob. Thanks again for Planet Normal, and thank you, Allison, for defending our freedom of speech. Regards, Bob, who incidentally now labels himself not only as former mug winner, which he always does, which please don't send me any more Planet Normal mugs. He's a proud member of the Free Speech Union. Good for you, Bob.
Good for you, Bob.
And this Bob the Bard latest is called Priorities. Officer, can you help me? A thief has stolen my phone. I'm sorry, sir, but we're overstretched, so I'm afraid you're on your own. Officer, people are robbing my shop. It keeps happening all the time. Well, if it's for less than 200 quid, it's not really a serious crime. Officer, I've been burgled. Can you please send somebody round? I would if I could, but we're understaffed, so I doubt your stuff will be found. Officer, I feel offended. Someone's words have made me distraught. Don't worry, sir, we're on the case. We'll make sure this monster is caught. Hooray! Bob the Bard. And Bob the Bard's being challenged because this is Richard, Allison and Liam not wanting to nor being capable of encroaching on Bob the Bard's muddy turf. I thought that given the magnificent demonstration by farmers this week, that maybe Liam could revisit his Irish potato famine roots. I'm sorry, that's a hate crime.
That's a hate crime.
Oh my God. That offends my Celtic sensitivities. and present this appropriate little ditty in Planet Normal's emails of the week section. Well, you're up, Richard. Here we go. Liam, assuming you know how it goes. Old McStarmer had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on that farm he found a hole, E-I-E-I-O. 22 billion here, 22 billion there, 22 billion every
Effing where.
effing where. Old McStarmer had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on that farm he levied taxes, E-I-E-I-O. Inheritance tax here, fertilizer there, even tractors. Oh yes, he'd dare. Old McStarmer had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, but on that farm, pause for dramatic effect. Liam, I'm pausing. He grew no crops. E-I-E-I. Oh no. Empty shelves here. Shortages there. Every supermarket completely bare. Old McStarmer had a farm. E-I-E-I-O. Just go. Hashtag stuck farmer. Editor's note. That's enough, McStarmer. We agree. And that's enough from Planet Normal for this week as we speed away from our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reason views. Email of the week. Go on, Allison.
Oh, I can't, because it's just, there are thousands. There are literally thousands.
Yeah, literally thousands.
I'm going to read every single one of them and I'll just cry, pour myself a large glass of Baileys and weep through them. Oh, what do you think?
I think you deserve a jacuzzi of Baileys.
Jacuzzi
Other chocolate
of Baileys.
liqueurs. Other chocolate liqueurs are available.
I think for cheering us up in actually quite a bleak week, have I sounded a bit mad, co-pilot? Have I sounded?
You sounded fine, Alison. Sure-footed.
Sure, okay.
Resolute.
Right.
Determined.
Unhinged. He's being polite.
I think you're probably off Emily Maitlis's Christmas card list, if I may say so.
That's a feather in my cap. So on that note, we're going to give it to E-I-E-I, Farmer Harmer. Richard, please send us an email, put mug winner in the subject and send us your full name and address. And thank you for putting a smile on our lips this quite sad week, really.
And as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal, which now Allison is plotting with Elon Musk to make a physical reality... or Elon. I'm not jealous. It's okay. I've got a rocket. It's just mine's made out of cardboard.
How good would it be to get
trying to do the outro.
The Rocket Man onto our rocket? I mean, come on, that would be... He's got to come, hasn't he?
What? Reg Dwight, otherwise known as Elton John. And the madness of Planet Earth comes back into view, thanks as ever to our producers Isabel Bouchard, Cass Ho and Louisa Wells. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.